Hey, I'm Daniel and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era video. And today we're looking at the Templar class, a balanced warrior with healing, defense and strong area damage. As always in my class guide videos, I'll be covering everything you need to know about this class, how their abilities work, how and when to upgrade to the master side, which races pair well with them, what starting skill line to choose, what additional skill lines offer good synergy and what items can enhance the build. And finally, I'll show a bit of gameplay so you could get a sense of how the class actually plays and feels at the table. I'll put timestamps in the description if you want to jump ahead, although I would really appreciate if you stick around for the whole thing. Now, a quick disclaimer, I think figuring things out for yourself is one of the most rewarding parts in this game, and I would encourage everyone to experiment and find their own playstyle. That said, the game can feel a bit overwhelming at first, so this guide is here to help you get started and understand how the class works. And if you're already a seasoned player, I hope you can still find something interesting here too. And now let's get into the guide. Alright, so let's go for the class abilities, as always starting with the innate ability, which says that if you start your turn in defensive battle form, heal for 1 health. Now there are 3 ways or kind of 3 cases where you can change your battle form. First, as a part of the engage. Second is before using your class ability, you can add a 1 light fatigue to switch battle form as well. And third, you can select your battle form during the battle setup, which technically happens before the start of your turn. So let's say if you currently have only 3 out of 4 health, and this is the beginning of battle setup to be precise, you deploy on the entrance tile as normal and you select your battle form to defense. That means that you're gonna start your turn even if combat round 1 already in defense, and you can heal for 1 health even effectively at the start of battle as well. But of course, during the battle on rounds 2 and further, if you want to start your turn in defensive battle form, that means you need to end your previous turn in defensive battle form as well. And I know this is pretty obvious, but nevertheless, people sometimes forget to switch battle forms. And of course, start of turn is referred to a very specific step of adventurer's turn, which happens even before your recovery step, before you can do any actions, and before you can normally switch your battle form during the engage. So just keep this in mind. Moving on to the class ability called Restoring Light for 2 tenacity interrupt. After you deal damage to an adjacent enemy, heal a party member inside for health equal to the amount of damage dealt. Now, as always, terminology is super important in this game, and so first of all, party member includes all adventurers and companions, and of course this includes yourself as well. You are a party member of yourself even if you're playing solo, and side means everyone on the same tile or adjacent tile, and of course obviously you always have a side with yourself. And because this ability interrupt, as the name suggests, you can interrupt the action. So let's say if you are standing here adjacent to this enemy, and let's say you engage this enemy in heavy weapon battle form, and let's say you roll just a single combat die. At this moment you can trigger your ability, spend 2 tenacity to use your Restoring Light, and again, as I said, because terminology is super important here, you can heal a party member for health equal to the amount of damage dealt. And so let's say if you're rolling just this combat die with 1 damage, but because this enemy has 1 defense, it means this enemy taking no damage, but you can still heal yourself or any other party member for that matter for 1 health, because that is how much damage you dealt, which is not necessarily the same amount of damage that the enemy is taking. And well, I think this ability is fantastic. Not only any class with a self-heal is really good, but with this ability you can heal not only yourself but also any party member. And I would say this is a pretty rare case where your heal actually works not only on adventurers but even on companions, so that's another good thing, but also because the amount of heal is scalable with the damage is just also amazing. This potentially means you can heal yourself or any other party member all the way up to full health, of course provided that you can deal that amount of damage, but there is pretty much no limit in this regard, so this is just absolutely awesome ability. Moving on to the next class ability, we have Sacred Ground for 2 tenacity in defensive battle form. Remove all status die from any one adventurer's cooldown track. So again, it's pretty plain and simple. You need to be in defensive battle form. This is probably the most important bit that is sometimes overlooked, but you just spend in 2 tenacity and you can remove all status dice from any one adventurer's cooldown track, which of course could be yourself or any other adventurers, which you don't necessarily have to be inside, just any one adventurers. And of course, status dice are all of those status effects like Bane or Blind or others, and you can remove all of them in one go. And of course, because this ability says that you need to remove all status dice, which means that even if you have some beneficial effect like this, stealth for example, you would still remove both of these dice with this ability. I would say this, generally speaking, is not a problem, because there are much more nasty and dangerous status dice and status effects that you would be absolutely happy to remove, so I think it's fair, and being able to remove just all of them at at once from any one adventurer's cooldown is just again an awesome ability. The next class ability is called Sun Shield. For 3 tenacity, gain 3 bonus health. So I guess let's talk about bonus health. So bonus health is extra additional health which you need to place on your race sheet rather than under your character chip, and because I don't have any race sheet just yet, let me put this on my class sheet instead, and this is where you track it. Also, all bonus health is removed during the end of battle cleanup, so it's not gonna carry over to the next battle. You will start with no bonus health at all, but of course there is no limit of how much bonus health you can have and you can gain during the battle. And whenever you take damage, you need to remove this bonus health first. So let's say if this Argonin bandit, it would roll 1 enemy combat die and it would deal 1 damage, but instead of removing 1 health chip under your character, you would remove it from your bonus health stack instead. And also keep it in mind that certain abilities that can bypass your bonus health, for example like true damage from this enemy Dreamora because of this enemy skill Arcane, or the Siphon enemy skill like from those North Pyromancer, because you're essentially losing health, so this North Pyromancer would kind of suck your health from your character chip and not your bonus health, so this is another thing to keep in mind. But other than that, without those kind of rare cases, I would say that your bonus health is effectively like your shield. It's another extra way of mitigating damage, which just increases your survivability pretty nicely. Although for the case of Templar, this isn't just defensive utility, we can turn this into offense thanks to the next class ability called Solar Flare, which says for 3 tenacity, deal a targetable enemy damage equal to your bonus health. So let's say we have our 3 bonus health from using our Sun Shield ability, and now we can spend 3 tenacity to deal that much damage, which would be 3 in this case, to deal that much damage to a targetable enemy. Now the word targetable I think is the key here, because this battle form doesn't require particular battle form. That means that we can use this in any battle form except defense, which in this case, let's say if you would use this in heavy weapon battle form, a targetable enemy would be an enemy on adjacent hex. But let's say if you switch to your ranged or magic battle form, you can use this ability and deal damage to any enemy within a range of 3. So let's say if you are standing, let's say on this hex and you are in magic battle form, you can use a Solar Flare to deal 3 damage to enemy even in range. I think this is sometimes gets overlooked because Templar is a kind of like a generally melee archetype, kind of like a tanky warrior that is staying adjacent to enemies, but just keep in mind that you have full flexibility in which battle form you want to use it. Let's say maybe you have up to 5 stamina or even 6 stamina. That means that if you are in range battle form, then a targetable enemy would be any enemy within that range. So again, just keep this in mind because this definitely makes this ability even stronger. And I would say because there is no limit on how much bonus health you can have during a battle, you can sometimes get an absolutely ridiculous 15 or like a 20 health stack. That means this Solar Flare ability might be the strongest single damage class ability, just a one-shot nuke essentially. It could be potentially even stronger than Pilgrim's class ability, even though of course this Solar Flare isn't true damage. Now admittedly, sometimes it's tricky to gain that much amount of bonus health, but there are definitely certain effects and items and racial abilities and sometimes even encounter effects that can help you with that. And moving on to the final class ability, we have a Luminous Shards. For 5 tenacity in magic battle form, roll 3 enemy combat dice and deal the damage to all targetable enemies. Deal an additional 2 damage to all Daedra enemies. Now first of all, this ability does require Matt to be in magic battle form, which probably gives a clue of how this character is designed to be a sort of a hybrid between a melee and a magic character, maybe sort of similar to Spell Sword. But of course the main thing about this ability that you roll enemy combat dice and you deal damage to all targetable enemies. And as we just talked about a moment ago, in magic battle form, a targetable enemy is any enemy within the range after your magic stats. Let's say in this case, because we have 3 magicka, and if we use this Luminous Shard, we would deal damage to pretty much any enemy on this clash tile. Because by standing in the center of the clash tile, that is exactly 3 hexes in any direction, so you would roll 3 enemy combat dice and you would deal that damage to everyone in that area. This is probably the strongest area damage in the game. It doesn't deal that crazy amount of damage, but just the area itself just absolutely huge. And you might be thinking that rolling just 3 enemy combat dice is kinda like meh, but trust me, even those 3 dice can sometimes creep to absolutely ridiculous numbers, especially since this ability deals extra damage to Daedra enemies. And yeah, of course I should mention that Daedra enemies are one of the 3 enemy types in the game. There are humanoids, there are beasts, and there are Daedras, kinda like a magic creatures if you will. For example, like this Spriggan, or Wisp Mother, or Scamps, or Storm Atronach, all those kind of elemental, kind of magical creatures. All of them are dangerous, as you can tell by this little icon with the horns, and all of those enemies, they would take 2 extra damage on top of what you rolled with enemy combat dice. So even just this kind of statistically average result of just rolling 3 damage with 3 enemy combat dice would already be enough to just one-shot this Spriggan and one-shot this Wisp Mother, and even deal some damage to this Scamp and Storm Atronach. And of course, given the fact that you can deal that damage to everyone around it, to the entire Clash battle, makes this ability definitely one of the strongest in the game. Now let's talk about how to become a Master Templar, and the upgrade requirement says that you need to deal at least 4 damage and heal at least 4 health on the same turn across any number of units. Now, as I said many times, terminology in this game and the specific wording is really important. As we already established, dealing damage is the number that you actually deal, which not necessarily the same as enemies taken. So let's say if you roll these 3 enemy combat dice, sorry, just your basic combat dice, with this specific result with number 1, 2 and 1, and let's say you are targeting this Argonian Bandit in heavy weapon battle form, it means you would deal 4 damage even though this enemy would take only 3, but this is what counts for your upgrade. Now there is also a second part which says that you need to heal for 4 health on the same turn, but unlike with damage that you're dealing, you need to actually be able to heal for that amount, which means you need to restore that much health. And that effectively means that you need to have at least 5 max health in order to be able to heal for 4 health. That means that if you have a started health stat of 4, you need to train at least 1 more health before you won't be able to fulfill the requirements. And now once your maximum health is 5 or more, now you need to wait until you get until the last health, which I know can be pretty risky sometimes, but there are ways of mitigating that, and only then you can heal up to 4 health, which would fulfill the requirements of this upgrade. So as long as you have 4 health missing, and as long as you have and being able to deal at least 4 damage with this ability, you can pretty easily fulfill that requirement. Now let's see what's changed on the master side, as always starting with the innate ability. If you start your turn in defensive battle form, heal for 1 health, no changes in that regard, but now we have a new part that you may also recover a combat skill die from your cooldown track, immediately roll it and apply the result. So now let's say if you start your turn in defensive battle form and you have your combat skill die in the cooldown track, and remember that combat are only those white dice, and if you want to, you can instantly recover it and immediately roll it and apply the result, which in this case would place this combat die with a number 1 in our active slot, because that is how you resolve those dice while in defensive battle form. So now you're not only healing for 1 health, but you're also effectively gaining 1 extra shield for free. Of course, it's not necessarily 1, it could be number 2 here, or it could be a Mesa Tenacity, but nevertheless, quite often you would place this with a number 1 in your active slot, so essentially gaining not only 1 health as 1 healing, but also 1 shield. Moving on, next we have a new class ability that was not available before. It's called Illuminate. For 1 Tenacity Interrupt, at any time, place an available combat skill die in an active slot, set it to a side of your choice. Now, because this ability is Interrupt and it specifically says that you can use this at any time, you can potentially use this right even before enemy engage. So let's say if this Argonian Bandit would roll this scary number 2 on their enemy combat die, you can say like, oh nope, you know what, I don't want to take that damage, so you can spend 1 Tenacity to immediately place this combat die with a number 2 in your active slot, and of course use it right away to prevent that damage. The only kind of little caveat is that you can do this only for your available combat skill die. So let's say if one of your combat skill dice is already in the active slot, and all other of your combat dice are there already in the cooldown track, it means you have no combat dice available, so you cannot use this ability. Again, just keep in mind that available means available for rolling, which is that sitting in your attribute rows over here. Moving on, next we have Restoring Spirit with no changes, Sacred Ground, no changes, Sun Shield, no changes, and even in Solar Flare, no changes whatsoever. I know, this might be the shortest master side on my video, but bear with me because we still have upgraded version of Luminous Shards, which now costs 4 Tenacity instead of 5, and now you can roll 4 enemy combat dice instead of 3. And this is what makes this whole upgrade worth it. The difference between 5 and 4 Tenacity is actually quite noticeable, and rolling 1 extra enemy combat die is actually stronger than you might think. So now effectively with this ability we have now a damage range from no damage whatsoever, just from blank, I know it's very unlikely, but still, and all the way up to 8, and potentially even up to 10 if you count the Daedra enemies. Now obviously those two are extreme results. It's pretty unlikely that you either have 0 or 8 damage, but nevertheless, even just basic 4 damage result, which I would say kind of statistically average as you can expect, is still crazy strong, giving a huge area of effect. So if you're looking at the master side and thinking, oh, I'm not sure if this whole thing is worth upgrading because so many class abilities, they remain unchanged, but trust me, even that a single upgrade of luminous shards makes it totally worth it. Now let's pick a race for our Templar, and the first option I would consider is Imperial. Now Templar is probably gonna be a melee character, at least that's kind of the general archetype that I'm going for, and because we have such an awesome class abilities that I would like to use whenever I can, or ideally even every turn. And now if you look at this racial ability of Imperial, that we can prevent up to 3 damage and instead gain that much tenacity, then hell yes please. Now if you watched my racial abilities tier list, you know that I rank Imperials very high. I think their racial ability is one of the strongest in the game. It's not borderline OP like some other couple of specific races, but it still is very practical. Just preventing damage and gaining that much amount of tenacity instead is just awesome, particularly for such classes that are very tenacity hungry like our Templar. Starting with 5 health is also great, particularly if you're going with a two-handed skill line, and spoiler alert, we're probably gonna go for a two-handed skill line in this build, simply because there are a couple of abilities that scale with the number of health you have, with the amount of health you have, so this might help as well. And all in all, I think Imperial is one of my favorite choice for Templar. But of course, let's see what some other options out there, and the next option I would consider is Breton. Bretons also have 5 starter health, which is also great for the same reason I explained in Imperial, but they're slightly more magicka focused, and starting with 3 magicka right out of the gate is awesome for using our luminous shard ability. And I think in general, because we're kind of a hybrid class, we're kind of a melee, a tanky character, but also with a lot of kind of magic infused class, I think Breton is just a natural choice. But of course, the racial ability of overtaxing a certain weapons without discarding them is so strong. You probably won't notice it that much when you just started out, particularly in the beginning of just session 1, but once you found some good items, good weapons specifically, this can be just absolutely bonkers. Certain item effects can be really strong, especially their overtax effects, and I would say specifically for weapons that require either two-handed battle form or magic battle form, so all the stuffs and all the big swords, their overtax effects are awesome in particular, and these are exactly the 2 kind of battle forms that we'll be using quite often. So I think Breton all in all is a fantastic class, especially in the late game. Another race that work well with Templar is Dark Elf. They're also slightly focused on magicka, just like Breton, because it's starting with 3 magicka right out the gate, which again helps to make the area damage from our luminous shard larger, which definitely might help, but of course most importantly because of the racial ability allowing to recover dice from your cooldown track and effectively using them again. And I would say for Templar specifically, I love using this racial ability as a sort of bad luck protection. There are a couple of specific dice that will be very key to our builds, and landing them on a miss might be a disaster, so with this racial ability you can definitely much easy recover from that. Even if you landed poorly and all of your really key important skill dice landed on a miss, you not only gain tenacity, but you can also recover them and roll them again. So personally, I would say whenever I play Templar as a Dark Elf specifically, I always have the most consistent results from my rolls. And finally, another race is Redguard, and to be honest, if you look at the stats, this might feel a little bit off because we don't have 5 health as Imperials or Bretons do, and we don't have 3 magicka as Dark Elves or Bretons do, so this might feel not as strong. But I think with this racial ability, we can just lean heavily on our Solar Flare ability, because not only this ability allows to remove fatigue or over fatigue from a cooldown track, as well as some nasty status dice, even though we can already do this with our class ability, but most importantly gaining bonus health, which normally is a kind of defensive toolkit, but specifically for Templar we can use this as a nuke, as our ability to deal a bunch of damage. And even though just gaining 3 bonus health once per battle may seem not like a lot, but it definitely helps to ramp up our bonus health quicker so we can deal more damage with Luminous Shard or with Solar Flare, and the difference between dealing 3 or 6 damage just on turn 1 is quite significant. So all in all, I would say Imperial is the most reliable because of the damage mitigation and tenacity generation. Breton can be just borderline OP towards the late game if you manage to find some good items. With Dark Elf you have a lot of bad luck protection against some poor rolls, and trust me, it can make quite a big difference, especially in certain trickier battles. And for the Redguard, normally I would say that this racial ability is a little kind of defensive / utility, but for the Templar specifically, you can turn this into offensive tool, which is great. And I would say starting with 3 combat also allows us to go slightly different route, whereas for pretty much all other races, normally I would start with some of the damage dealing skill line, namely two-handed skill line, but for the Redguard, because of all those combination of stats and racial ability, you can try to go a slightly different route, and personally I even start with something different, and I'm gonna talk about this very soon. And so all in all, for the purpose of this build, I'm gonna stick to Redguard. Alright, we've got our race, we've got our class, time to build our character. The first stat I'm gonna slot is health, and I'm gonna slot this on the top left corner, just as my personal preference. For the next stat, stamina, the question is whether do we want to slot this across health or on a new row, and given that I want to level up my stamina quite a lot and I probably would love to level up some health as well, I think it would be best to slot this on actually in a new row. I'll just put this underneath health, just like that, with 3 corresponding stamina stat tokens. For Magicka, it's a similar question, do we want to put this across existing stat, or do we want to put this on a new row? And you know what, I think I do want to level up my Magicka, but not for a lot, maybe just up to 3, and I think the same would be for health, so I think in this case slotting them across each other would actually be alright. This would give me just enough space to level up my Magicka up to 3, because that is the kind of the minimum amount that I want to have, given our Luminous Shard ability, but this would also leave enough space to train health, just so we could have a little bit more tankier and potentially even deal some more damage. For the combat though, definitely gonna put this on a new row and not across stamina, because as I said, I want to level up my stamina quite a lot, so you know what, let me put this combat probably here on a new row, just from the right hand side, like that. And with the cooldown value set to 1, now all the basic stats are set, and now the real question is what starting skill line do we want to start with? And I think there are 2 good options. First is heavy armor, and the second option is two-handed. Now, generally speaking, for most players and specifically for more races, I would suggest going with the two-handed skill line first, because generally speaking you need to deal more damage, and damage is good and it's a slightly easier way to start. That said, I think starting with heavy armor instead is slightly harder at first, simply because I have so much survivability and also extra damage, and it's ultimately a faster way of getting to Juggernaut first, and this is the skill line that we definitely want, so we're able to use our awesome class abilities more often. I think given the fact that we're also starting with 3 combat dice also helps a bit if we choose to go with the heavy armor route as our starting skill line, and because we can deal damage with the skill dice themselves, but also because of the skill die called Immovable, which can slightly be kinda like an offensive toolkit in your disposal. But you know what, let's put the skill dice aside for a moment and let's focus on the skill line, and as I said, for most players I would suggest going for two-handed, but personally whenever I'm playing Templar, and especially as a red guard, and generally prefer going for heavy armor instead. But now the questions continue, because there are 2 different level 1 skill dice that we can choose as our starting skill line. That is so because there are 2 constitutions, 2 resolve, so that means we can either train 1 each of them or 2 copies of the same die. Now functionally they work exactly the same, they prevent damage, with the only difference that one of them prevents damage only from adjacent enemies, while another prevents damage from non-adjacent enemies. And so while generally speaking I would say most of the time you're gonna be taking damage from adjacent enemies, I think it's still a little bit more balanced and well-rounded of training both of them. I think if you would go with other direction, let's say if you train both of these to prevent only adjacent damage, yes, you'll be pretty much invincible against adjacent units, but a single pesky archer somewhere far in the distance can kick your butt pretty hard, so you know what, as I said, I tried both of them, tried going in all different combinations with this skill line, and my personal preference is just to go for a little bit more balanced approach and training both resolve and constitution like that. From there we can go straight to level 2 and train Immovable, and just a quick heads up, I'll be doing a separate build specifically focused around this skill die, like a full complete Immovable build, with doing a bunch of reflect damage back to enemies. This is not one of them, but I still find this a pretty nice help, especially given that we have 3 combat dice anyway. And by the way, I'm not going into full details on how each of those skill dice work, simply because I have another video specifically titled Heavy Armor Skill Line Explained, so if you're not sure how any of those skill dice work, I would definitely suggest checking it out. And in the meantime we can continue, and the next thing I would suggest doing is to hunt for 2 more skill lines, specifically acrobatics and speech. And just because our class abilities are so awesome and they can carry you through the entire session, simply because they can deal so much damage, I definitely love leaning more towards and using my class abilities more often. I think that also what makes Templar quite unique, so you feel like you're actually playing a class and not just generic skill lines. And so for the acrobatics I'm gonna slot this across stamina, and it's best to do this quite early on until your stamina is trained, because you're gonna need at least 2 slots. First, so we could train a level 1 skill die called Fleet Phantom, even though we don't really care about this because that's the only thing that we want is Windwalker on the level 2, and once that's trained we're gonna untrain Fleet Phantom and slide Windwalker to the right, just like that. And this is why you need to do this quite like relatively early on, at least until you have your 5th stamina, otherwise you won't be able to do this, or at least you technically can, but you're gonna need to train stamina, and that would be require a lot more experience, so it's just best to do this while you are at 4 or below stamina. And of course, slotting Windwalker over here, this acrobatic skill line across stamina, it means that we won't be able to train 6 stamina at all, but personally I find it just unnecessary. I think training up to 5 stamina is a plenty already. Now for the speech skill line, I think the best slot we can have is here across heavy armor, and now once you have your Windwalker, it's now definitely worth spending at least 1 experience in training at least 1 authority die, which means now every battle you can have up to 5 tenacity for free essentially, which means you almost guarantee can use your luminous shard ability every battle at least once. Now going back to the heavy armor skill line, we're definitely gonna need a level 3, and I'm gonna place this unstoppable skill die like that. And now the question is whether do we even want to keep our immovable here. I mean, both immovable and unstoppable are pretty good, but the main reason we're going for this skill line is because of the juggernaut, which we want like that. But personally I also like having at least 2 authority dice, which means we would love to have this slot available to train another authority here, which means we need to get rid on either of those. If you chose to keep unstoppable and you can untrain immovable like that, this can result in saving you just 1 experience, because that means that you can train your juggernaut on this row, on this like column rather, which costs only 2 experience rather than 3. And I think unstoppable is great, particularly when you play in certain provinces or certain endgames which require a lot of mobility. I'm not gonna spoil which one of them, but if you know, you know. But I think either of those options are great. I think having immovable instead of unstoppable is also legit. You can train it like that, and of course you can then untrain your unstoppable to slide the juggernaut like that, which still leaves you a room for training another authority, which is great. And as I said, even though we're not going full on the immovable build, but still even having just a 3 reflect essentially dealing that much damage back to adjacent enemies is still quite nice, especially because we have our luminous shard, so we oftentimes deal a bunch of damage but maybe not necessarily finishing off certain enemies, but this will definitely gonna help to push it a little bit further, because maybe you use the luminous shards, let's say you dealt 4 damage and maybe some remaining health left on certain level 1 or 5 enemies, and so with this reflect from immobile they can essentially defeat themselves just by engaging you. So this is pretty cool. Or sometimes it can be the other way around, sometimes those enemies they engage you first, which means they take in some damage and then you can finish them off with luminous shards a little bit easier. I find just a little kind of nice synergy. I almost think about this immovable almost like in a combination with luminous shards specifically. Although as I said, having unstoppable instead is totally legit and might be even a better option specifically in certain provinces. By this time you definitely should have a more cooldown, probably at least up to 3 I would say is a minimum. We don't need a lot of cooldown because we rather want those dice to stay in a cooldown track longer, but sometimes it can be a little bit unfortunate if you rolled a miss, and in that case you actually do want to recover your dice more quickly so you can roll them again next turn, so that is a consideration too. But I would say at this point up to 3 is probably like a bare minimum. And of course you want to have more stamina, especially if you're not going for the unstoppable build, because you do need some extra mobility, and once you trained your Windwalker you can even train your 5th stamina safely already at this point. And I would say training at least 1 more magicka is also great, so just so we could use our luminous shards on even larger area. Now probably somewhere around that point I think it's already great to start training a 2-handed skill line just like that. And of course you're gonna need to train your level 1 first, then level 2 skill die first before you can go high, but frankly the only thing we need here are on the level 3 and 4. And so the 2 dice that we have on level 3 are Momentum and Executioner, and generally speaking I would say Executioner is probably stronger since it's just such a great answer against some of the most nastiest enemies like stalwart enemies or even divert enemies. But because we don't have much health, at least just yet, I think at this stage it's best to train Momentum first, because generally speaking we're gonna have a bunch of fatigue in our cooldown track, so this can be quite a serious burst of damage. And now once we have Momentum trained, we can untrain both of these skill dice of level 1 and 2, slide the remaining dice like that, and next I would probably go for level 4 skill die, Cleave on this slot over here. And even though we still don't have much health, so this cleave won't be as high hitting as on some other classes, especially since we're playing Redguard with only 4 starting health instead of 5, but I still find it quite useful even when this die can deal 4 or 5 damage if it rolls on this side and deals 5 damage up to your stamina, so nevertheless I find it still quite reliable and good source of damage. For the next advancements I would go for some health, because it's no longer just our defensive toolkit, it essentially becomes our offense as well because of the cleave. And I think once you have at least maybe 6 health around that mark, you can already train Executioner, because you can already use it pretty often I would say. And for the remaining advancements, I would say go for another speech die, authority. You might even want to upgrade your cooldown track slightly. Up to 4 is probably the sweet spot for this build. I mean 5 probably won't hurt, but it's quite a lot of experience already, so I would say ending up with this build with a 4 cooldown track value is a little bit more realistic, I would say, at least from my experience. And probably the last question is whether do we want to train the 4th Magicka just to increase the range of our Luminous Shard even further, or do we want to train another health stat here? And personally, I think having just 3 Magicka is a sweet spot. If you're standing in the middle of a clash tile, that is enough range to reach pretty much any enemy on that clash tile, so I would say training up to 4th Magicka might be just a little bit overkill, and especially since now we have Cliff and Executioner, I think you'll get more value by training another health instead. And so that's pretty much is the build. It may seem like there is not much damage going on here, we have just a few kind of damage dealing dice, not counting the basic combat dice, but trust me, we have plenty of damage because of our class abilities, and we have a pretty good toolkit of allowing us using those class abilities more often, specifically because of these authority dice, Windwalker and even Juggernaut. But of course you'll see how it all plays in action very soon. Now let's talk about some items that work great with this build, and the first one is House Hex's Cuirass. After an enemy engages you, gain 1 tenacity. Now if you have any class with awesome class abilities that you would want to use every turn, this is the item that you need. This essentially allows you to gain up to 5 tenacity for free essentially, so you can dump all of your tenacity by the end of your turn to finish off your turn with no tenacity, but then start your next turn with full tenacity again, just using all this good stuff again. Obviously a legendary item, generally speaking a little harder to acquire, but whenever you see this in the store, definitely grab it. In the same veins, we have another item which is Shoulder Mounted Parasol for 1 tenacity interrupt. When you would gain any amount of light fatigue, remove 1 light fatigue from your cooldown track instead. Now because we're playing the Juggernaut build, it means that whenever we take extra engage or switching battle form to trigger class ability, we're gaining a bunch of extra fatigue, effectively 1 single engage if you're playing on expert difficulty with Juggernaut. That's essentially 3 extra light fatigue, but with this item you're not only you're not gaining any of this light fatigue, but you even removing existing light fatigue from your cooldown track. So I would say this item is just absolutely awesome, and it gets even better specifically if you're playing a Dark Elf, simply because you can get even more value when you're using your Dark Elf racial ability to recover up to 4 dice, replacing them with the life fatigue, and with this item you can essentially recover all of your dice even without gaining light fatigue at all. Just awesome item, highly recommend. Now remember when I said that if you choose to play Breton, you can do some crazy shenanigans that no other race can do, and well, I think this item, Scam Crusher, is just one of them. The basic effect of this item, ignore 1 defense on your target for each combat dice roll disengage. We don't actually care about this, but we do care about the overtax effect, and this is why you need Breton, because otherwise that would be just one off effect. But of course with Breton racial ability you can use this pretty much every battle, and it says ignore all defense on enemies until the end of your turn. So effectively what this item allows you to do is to make a single engage in 2-handed battle form, use this overtax effect, and for the rest of your turn you ignore all defense on all enemies, which means that even your Luminous Shard ability can deal so much more damage because of this ignoring defense effect. It just gets sometimes crazy strong, especially when you're dealing with high defensive enemies, level 20 enemies specifically, which typically have either 2 or 3 defense, but with this overtax effect, your Luminous Shard just gonna melt all of them effectively. So strong, but again, you need to be Breton to play this effect. And now continue with the theme of strong one-off effects, we have this consumable item, Bewitched Sugar Skulls. Discard this item, then adventurers might gain a collective total of 6 bonus health. Now of course, generally speaking, bonus health is pretty nice, it's a little defensive option, but of course with Templar we can turn this bonus health as our offensive tool, and let's say if you use this item and then you use your racial ability of Red Guard, and then you use your Sun Shield, you effectively gain 12 bonus health, which then would allow your Solar Flare pretty much one-shot any enemy around you. Obviously this is a consumable, it's a one-off effect, you need to discard this item after use, but if you see this item somewhere in the store, definitely grab it, and I would suggest you keeping it until the end game, where it can definitely make a big difference. The next item is Argonian Tunic. For 2 tenacity, gain 1 bonus health. If you are in the Black Marsh province, gain 1 additional bonus health. Now generally speaking, I would say gaining 1 bonus health for 2 tenacity is not the best deal, but because we're gonna have Windwalker, we can use this effect only for 1 tenacity, and specifically if you're playing in Black March, you can have up to 2 bonus health for just 1 tenacity, which is definitely much better. So I would say if you're playing in Black March specifically, then this definitely can be a pretty good item, especially since it's actually not a chest, it's another armor piece, which means you can use this Argonian tunic even with House Hexus Cuirass. They not exclude each other because it's different item types, so even though this is not the best item, it can still be pretty nice again to buff our solar flare damage output. And the next one is Sigil of Magnus Gift. If your magic stat is even, act as if it's 1 higher. If you are Breton or High Elf, this item's effect is still active even while it's in your pack. Now, I'd probably not recommend this item if you're playing Dark Elf or Red Guard, simply because I love having 3 magicka and 3 health sitting across each other, but if you're playing Breton or Imperial specifically, which both start with 5 health, I think this gets a little bit better, which means you can either afford training 4th magicka while still having 7 health, or you can go the other way around and go for the 9 health and 2 magicka, which effectively will be turned into 3 magicka with this Sigil of Magnus Gift. Alright, and finally let's see how this class plays and feels in action. As always, for the purpose, I created this demo Clash Battle with the enemy pool of 39, that because the number is needed in order to advance this character to this stage, and also because 39 is generally one of the most challenging number as you can have, because we have all a variety of different enemies. We have a level 20, level 10, level 5 and 4 level 1 enemies. And of course I'm having a complete fresh start, which means I don't have any tenacity, which is pretty crucial for our class. I also don't have any items, and of course by the time you advance your character to this stage, you definitely have some strong and hopefully even synergistic items, so I don't have any of them, which definitely makes it a little bit more challenging. And I also don't have any dice in my cooldown track, which in this case again isn't quite good, because I would rather prefer to have at least this heavy armor and maybe this Windwalker dice already in my cooldown track. And to be honest, even some fatigue would be nice, because that means that I could potentially use my momentum die right away, but again, because I don't have anything, it means I'm gonna need to take a lot of engages just to set things up, which definitely makes it a little bit more challenging, I would say, that you would normally play. Alright, so it's beginning of combat round 1, adventure return, and let's see what we can do. Now first of all, I choose to deploy my character in the heavy weapon battle form instead of defensive, which means that my passive ability not gonna work, but to be honest, I just don't need any healing and I don't want to place this combat dice in the active slot just to get the most value out of them for my immovable. Now as always, let's see who is the most threatening enemy here in this pool, and it looks like this actually level 10 Banekin enemy is the most threatening, even though we have a level 20. Just because it's a ranged enemy and it can apply daze, this definitely can be quite nasty. So as my first action, I think I'm gonna move my character 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes closer to this gentleman, not only so I could hopefully deal some damage, but also because the positioning is the key for our character because of the luminous shard ability. I want to make sure that all enemies are within my range, specifically in my magic range, which is 3 in this case, so generally speaking, by standing somewhere here in the clash tile, pretty much all enemies are within your reach, which is exactly the point and exactly the thing why I love to have at least 3 magicka, because that's in most cases enough to cover pretty much the entire clash. Alright, so as my first engage, I think I'm gonna roll both Executioner and Cleave and probably some of my authority dice to have my tenacity engine going. Although you know what, now as I think about it, I think it's kind of risky to target this Banekin because I'm not sure if my Executioner can land. So you know what, I think actually my safest option would be to target this Skewer instead, because no matter what of those 2 dice land, that hopefully should be enough. I mean, if my Executioner lands, that would be lovely, means I can instantly defeat this enemy, or if my Cleave lands, because I have 7 health, that means that hopefully some of this at least would be enough, and that means that I can also hopefully deal a little bit of extra damage to Banekin, and then maybe I'll finish it off later with my class abilities. So yeah, that's definitely a safer option, and that would be my first engage. So I'm rolling Cleave and Executioner, and I'm targeting Skewer, and I'm also rolling one of my authority dice. And okay, let's see what we get. And we've got a miss on the Executioner, which is why exactly I said that it's a little bit safer to target this Skewer, because I would rather go for a guaranteed kill in this case. And we also got just this number 3 on authority out of 5, so definitely not the best result by any means, but hey, at least we got the job done. So first I'm resolving this one, gaining 3 tenacity and also 1 extra tenacity because of the miss, so we are now at 4 tenacity and this dice of course drained. And now this goes to my cooldown track. And this enemy is down, but I'm also gaining 1 over fatigue because of the enemy skill rot. So this goes like that, and I'm also dealing half of the damage rounded up, which would be 4 in this case, to all adjacent enemies, and that means that Banekin takes 2 damage as well because of this area damage essentially. Now I'm taking another engage, so I'm adding 2 light fatigue to my cooldown track, and that is so because I'm playing on the expert difficulty. And I'm switching battle form to defense, and now I think I'm gonna roll all of my heavy armor skill dice alongside Windwalker. And just to clarify that I was able to roll my authority die alongside those heavy weapon two-handed skill dice, because with constellation skill dice they don't require any battle form. This is why you can able to roll them in any battle form. So this exact reason why I'm also now able to roll my Windwalker in defensive battle form alongside those heavy armor. Alright, so let's see what we have. These are the dice, 5 dice I'm rolling. No need to declare a target. Let's see what we have. And we've got a miss on resolve, which means I'm no longer safe from ranged attacks. And we've got Windwalker with just number 1, which is definitely not the best result, but I think it would be a little bit unreasonable to expect every time get this number 2, so this is a perfect average result, I guess. And we've got Juggernaut, which is good as well as Immovable and Constitution, so pretty decent result, I guess, but still kind of within the norms of average. Now the question is, in which order do I want to place those dice in my cooldown track? Let me place this aside for a moment, and look, because I have 3 these dice, fatigue dice, in my cooldown track, it means whenever I put it gonna be after that, but the thing is that I'm planning to use my racial ability to remove all this fatigue, which means that whenever the next 2 dice that I'm gonna place in my cooldown track, they would be recovered next turn. So now the question is, do I want my Windwalker to be recovered? And definitely not, so I'd rather place this last. The same for Juggernaut, but of course I don't mind recovering this miss, so I think that would be the order for me. So basically kind of the main kind of thought process is that whenever I see a miss, I would rather recover it quicker, so potentially I can roll this again, and if I have some good value, then in that case I don't mind these dice to sit in my cooldown track longer. So these are the dice that I'm placing in my cooldown track in this specific order, and that was the end of my second engage. And I think I should have also gained 1 tenacity because of this miss, so I'm now full at 5, which is pretty good. Now as my next action, I'm gonna use my racial ability to remove up to 3 fatigue from my cooldown track, so this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm removing 1 over fatigue and 2 light fatigue, and instead I'm gaining that much amount of bonus health, so I now have 3 bonus health, which will definitely come in handy for this ability. So I'm sliding the remaining dice like that, and that was my racial ability. Now because I'm sitting at full 5 tenacity and I don't like it to have any waste, I think I would rather spend some tenacity now, so I think I'm gonna use my Sun Shield class ability. It doesn't require any battle form, which means I can use this even in defensive battle form, so this is good. And because I have Windwalker in my cooldown track, I have 1 tenacity discount, so I essentially just need to spend 2 tenacity from 5 down to 3 to use my Sun Shield and gain 3 more bonus health, so I'm now a total of 6 bonus health on my character, which is pretty nice. And now I think might be the good time to use my Luminous Shard ability, and because it requires a magic battle form, that means I normally need to add 1 light fatigue to change battle form, but because of my Juggernaut, it says that whenever you switch battle form, which I just did, I might gain another light fatigue to also gain 2 tenacity, so I'm now back at full 5, which is great. And now I'm gonna spend 3 tenacity because of my Windwalker discount, so I'm using my Luminous Shard and reduced my tenacity from 5 down to 2, and I'm gonna roll 4 enemy combat dice to deal that amount of damage to all targetable enemies, which are in this case all of those enemies on the clash battle. So let's see what we have. 4 enemy combat dice using my Luminous Shard ability. And we've got 4 damage, which I think is the most kind of statistically average result as you can have from rolling 4 combat dice. The damage range could be either from 0 all the way up to 8, so 4 is perfectly in the middle. So let's resolve damage one at a time, starting with a level 20 Balmammoth, because it has 1 defense. It means that it's taking 3 damage, just like that. Next we have level 20, but because this enemy is Daedra, it takes 2 extra damage, which means this enemy takes 6 damage, 4 plus 2 extra, and that is exactly enough to defeat this enemy because it has just 4 health left because it was damaged from my clip. So this is good. Now resolving next, again this Mudcrab, because it's stalwart it can lose only 1 health unfortunately, or minus 1 health from Mudcrab. Then this Nord Bandit, because it doesn't have any defense, it means all 4 damage goes through, so it's actually taking 4 damage. Now next for the Argonian Bandit, this actually is already enough to defeat this enemy entirely because it has only 3 health and 1 defense, which is why I said this ability is ridiculously strong, even though it's just 4 damage in this case. As you can see, it's still enough to deal some serious damage to this clash. Now, and for the last enemy, Dark Elf Bandit, it's also taking 4 damage because it has no defense, so this is all good. Alright, and this ability is resolved. Now let's see if I want to make anything else on this turn. And I think while I still have all my 6 bonus health, and in order to get the most value out of it, it's best to use my Solar Flare now, because otherwise all those enemies, they can deal some serious damage and potentially knock off all those bonus health. I think I just rather spend my last 2 remaining tenacity to activate Solar Flare and deal a targetable enemy, which in this case could be any of those enemies, because I have still in my magic battle form and my range is 3, so I think I'm gonna select this Bell Mammoth and I'm gonna deal it 6 damage because that's how much bonus health I have on my character. So because of 1 defense, this enemy takes 5 damage, which is still pretty good. Yep, that is 5 health. Alright, now is definitely the end of my turn. Although, of course, if I had any adjacent enemy, I could still potentially use my momentum, taking another engage and dealing potentially up to 8 more damage, but I just don't have any adjacent enemies anymore, so yeah, I'm definitely leaving my turn like that. And even though I'm not ending my turn in defense, which means that on the next turn my passive ability not gonna trigger again, but I just don't care too much about it. I don't think I'm gonna need heal this turn or the next turn, and I don't want to use my combo dice to place them in an active slot. I'd rather use them as an extra attack essentially with my immovable. Alright, so it's enemy's activation turn. Starting with level 20, we have this Mammoth moving 2 hexes closer to me and rolling 3 enemy combat dice. And let's see what we have. That is 2 damage and 1 miss, but because this enemy has a skill aggressive, it's gonna reroll on all misses, so let's see what we have. And well, that is another miss, which is a little bit unfortunate for the enemy, but you know what, we can treat this. Let's just, for the sake of example, I think this is more statistically average that you can have from rolling 3 enemy combat dice, so let's pretend that this enemy is dealing 3 damage, and I'm preventing 2 of them because of my constitution, so that means only 1 damage that I need to take. So yeah, this is what I'm losing 1 my bonus health. That was the end of this enemy's turn. Now all the remaining enemies are level 1, so it doesn't matter in which order I'm gonna play them. So let's go with the Mudcrab first. Oh, actually before that, this level 20 enemy should have taken 3 damage back because of my immovable, so because of 1 defense it taken 2 damage, so yeah, this is nice. I always forget to use that, to be honest. Alright, so now let's go for Mudcrab. It's gonna roll just a single enemy combat die, and honestly, I don't think it can deal any damage. Yeah, even if that would be 2 damage, I would still be able to prevent this with my constitution, so no damage taken regardless, but this enemy still takes 3 damage back from my immobile, but of course, because it's stalwart, it can lose only single health, which is a little bit unfortunate, but hey, next is this Nord Bandit, and it can't even reach me, so it's gonna move 2 hexes like that, and finally for the Dark Elf Bandit, I'm gonna move 1 hex closer because of range 2, and it's gonna roll 2 enemy combat dice. Let's see what we have. And that is 3 damage, quite serious damage. Look at that, from just a level 1 enemy, but because I don't have my resolve, that means I need to take all those 3 damage, so I'm losing 3 bonus health essentially, because this acts almost like a shield effectively. Alright, and that was the end of enemy's activation turn. Now it's the beginning of combat round 2. I'm gonna recover those 4 dice, so I'm placing back my heavy armor die like that, as well as 2-handed, and I'm sliding the remaining dice to the left. And it looks like this battle is pretty much over already. I'm just gonna move 1 hex closer like that, and I think I'm gonna roll my cleave alongside another authority die. That's probably gonna do it. I mean, I could probably use my executioner or even momentum, but to be honest, I would rather avoid taking in over fatigue, since already I used my racial ability, so I won't be able to just freely remove it like that. And for momentum, well, I guess I could use this just as a safe option, just in case my cleave miss, or just for extra tenacity, so yeah, why not? And of course I'm taking a new engage, so I'm switching my battle form to heavy weapon, and these are the 3 dice that I'm rolling, so that is momentum, cleave, and authority. And I'm targeting Bell Mammoth, even though it's not even strictly needed, so let's see what we have. And wow, we got a miss on the cleave, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I think that still won't matter that much, because I still have now enough tenacity to use my Luminous Shard again, which is pretty much is the end of battle, but hey, you know what, let's just resolve this. So first, how many life fatigue I have in my cooldown track? That is 2, that means my momentum can deal 4 damage, which is of course enough to defeat this Bell Mammoth, so another enemy down, and I'm gaining 4 tenacity. This gets drained, and this 2 goes to my cooldown track, and I think it doesn't matter in which order I'm gonna place them, but you know what, let me just place this cleave first anyway. And I'm gaining 4 tenacity, which is of course more than needed to trigger my luminous shard. So that's what I'm gonna do. Again, I'm switching battle form to magic, so that means I'm adding 1 light fatigue, but because of Juggernaut I'm adding another one to gain even more tenacity, even though that's a little bit an overkill, because that means I'm already at a maximum of 5, but hey, why not? That means that potentially I could start the next battle with more tenacity, so this is always good, and I think it's fair price, or just 1 light fatigue, it's not a big deal. So now I'm spending 3 tenacity because of my Windwalker, using luminous shard, bringing my tenacity from 5 down to 2, and again I'm rolling 4 enemy combat dice, which likely will be enough now to defeat all those enemies, but yeah, let's see what we have. And wow, that is 5 damage, which is definitely more than needed, but I mean, even if we had a bunch of misses, even with that result, I would still be able to defeat the rest of the enemies, because this Stalwart Mud Crab has the last health, so this enemy is down, and this Dark Elf Bandit also had the last health chip, so this enemy is down, and the same for Nord Bandit, also last 2 health, no defense, so yeah, these all enemies are down just like that, with that huge area damage of Luminous Shard. And wow, out of all of my class guides and those Demo Clash battles, I think this might be the first one where we completely finished the battle just on round 2. You look at that, the amount of raw pure damage that Templar has is just absolutely crazy. This Luminous Shard specifically, I think this ability is so strong, even though we're rolling just 4 enemy combat dice, so that might seem not like a lot, but as you can just saw, that's still a plenty to defeat all these pesky level 1 enemies and even damage some level 10 and 20 enemies, so that is a lot of damage still, especially if there are some Daedras, and because we're playing Red Guard, I think the ability of removing over fatigue from your cooldown track is great, and essentially gaining 3 extra bonus health also helps to speed up to ramp up the damage from your Solar Flare. You're essentially skipping an extra turn of using another Sun Shield, because effectively with this racial ability and a single Sun Shield, you already have 6 bonus health, so that is great already. And of course with a Windwalker you can potentially use your Sun Shield every turn, stacking up more and more health every turn, and of course there are some consumable items and other items that can gain you even more bonus health, so this can be just a very strong single damage nuke. And of course because we have so many awesome class abilities that cost tenacity, this combination of Windwalker and Juggernaut are definitely the king of this build. So I would say overall this is easily one of the top 3 strongest classes currently in the game. It has a lot of sustainability because of passive heal and restoring spirit, and also being able to remove any status die from a cooldown track is also can be pretty powerful, but of course all those class abilities like Sun Shield and Solar Flare and of course Luminous Shards are just so good. I had a lot of fun playing this class in all of my campaigns, and I think it's great. And that's a wrap for today's video. This class guys take quite a bit of time and effort to put together, so if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more board gaming content. And if you would like to support the channel directly, you can also do this over on Patreon, and it really means a lot to me. And well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.